concepts that, or all of these images that I would get from the machine, if they haven't been latent or apparent in the machine even before I approached it. And I was just helping these images to get out there in the world. So I tried to develop a bodily understanding of what the machine was actually doing, and this correlation with the body has, from that point in time, somehow followed me throughout the later years. And I made myself the arm or the tool of the machine with this piece, applying a particle set of 3,000 particles as pins to the wall. So this is something like computer-navigated pinning. And I always try to find a common ground for understanding what the machine or the computer has to offer to me. So I'm really not interested in screen-based work at all. These things, they come and go and they don't touch me, so I try to put them out into the world and somehow let them permeate my body and sanctuate the things with the time that I invest in them. So I spent 2 days putting these pins into the wall, to understand them better. So, as I said, the computer somehow became a sparring partner for me. I felt that I was approaching the machine with an image concept, and what you get back is something else. So it is never the case that you write a code or you translate your image idea into software, and what you get back is exactly what you preconceived, but it's kind of a give and take of letting go with the flow and with what the machine has to offer. So in the final result, in the artwork that is there, I would say that there's at least like 50% of original creativity that is coming from the machine. I'm just helping this to occur, to come into the world. And with these drawings, I try to create an amalgam of man and machine drawing, where the single line would have gestural quality. So when you single out one of these traces, that you couldn't really tell if it was made by a machine or by a human, but only by the sheer multitude and the complexity. And the similarity of the lines, you would tell that this is a synthetic process or an imprint of some physical process. So all of these things happened in the computer, and I felt, even though I give them a very big size and scale, I always felt distant to it. I always feel that the actual thing is not what you see here. The actual thing is the computer code, or is the process that creates this file. If you destroy this image, you can easily reprint it. So there is always the real thing is somehow inaccessible to our senses, and I'm only instantiating it in the real world. So I was looking for a possibility to get these images out into the world and still, again, let them somehow run through my body or develop a bodily understanding of the whole process. So what I did is I appropriated an industrial process of digital image exposure, which is laser exposure of photo paper. And I hacked that and tried to be in charge of the full process in my studio. So I invented a laser drawing machine which allowed me to navigate a laser beam over photo paper. And this is the machine that you see here, the laser itself, is just for beam quality. It is a gas laser, but it has a ridiculously low efficiency. So the whole machine consumes something like 4.5 kilowatts of power, and what I use on the beam is something just like 1 or 2 milliwatts in the end. But that's not the point. I think you could make it much more efficient, or maybe with LED, I don't know. But I'm amateur in these things, so I try to get the technology that I think is right, and then somehow hack it together. The first version of this laser drawing device was to realize that I hacked the sound card and put the analog signals onto mirrors who ran the laser over the photo camera. So this is in the studio. The black and white stuff is on a red light, so you can photograph it. And it gets very hot in the studio, so this laser takes a lot of energy, and to me it is, this is part of the idea that you invest a certain lifetime, a certain attention in a particular piece, and that creates on the artist side a different attention for what you do. You only have a limited lifetime, you only have the limited resources, and when you work with generative systems, you know that there is like an infinite possibility of these things, but by really making them with your own hands or in your own studio, you somehow sanctuate an individual piece with your lifetime. You bless it. You say you're better than the rest of infinite possibilities, and by this I feel you reappropriate the piece into the realm of the human. Before it was somehow just, it could be anything, and nobody had a decision about it being beautiful or ugly, or had like a judgment about it. So this is the laser exposing something like this, and yeah, when you lock yourself up in the studio with these apparatuses and try to understand them and try to understand the glitches or get rid of the glitches, you feel somehow related to these times where science was still very close to art. So I really like this image where, from a time where looking at the stars was kind of a freak business, and you had like this beautiful atelier chair down there, and people were kind of alone with their ideas of how the world works and how everything is held together. And you build your machines yourself to understand how the world is held together and how it works. So one of the pieces that I did with a black and white laser was based on these shapes, which are particle traces in a cloud chamber. These traces are left by particle collisions and debris that is left over from these collisions. So these charged particles leave these curved traces in the magnetic field of the center. So this is one of the pieces that I made from it. It's on hand-coated, you can see the similarity of the shape, but obviously there is no real algorithm that produces these signatures in reality, so I had to rewrite it. I kind of reverse engineered the traces that you saw in these particle collision detectors, and ran kind of a pseudo scientific experiment producing these samples that would just be there as a proof that we want to know how the world works. So you can't really read this, but if you show it to a scientist, he can assign it to this certain field of research, for sure. So this is a couple of images from the process in the studio. Here's signal on. So this is hand coating the sheets and then exposing them, washing them in the studio. So then I wanted to take this back to a color process and revisit this series of the human factor drawings and really do my own research into the forming of the color gel layers in the photo paper, and finally get results in a larger scale on color paper. So in order to process these things, I expose it on photo paper. This on the right thing is the film cassette, and then I roll this up in the darkroom, drive it over to the lab, and they do the development for me. And in this very physical collaboration with the machine creates artifacts of its own. You let the unforeseeable happen and suddenly come to a level where you really are integrated in the process with the machine, where you have to have some mastership of the process, like in old school printing techniques, where you have to know how thick to apply the paint, how fast to press it on the paper, and so forth. So the details of these images here, they really, this is suddenly a result that I can't reproduce. It's only there once. So it's exposed in layers, and so the thicker lines are slow and bright projected lines, and the thin lines are like very low and slow, and I use diffusion screen to expose second layers of blurred parts of the image to create these images. And if I did the same, tried to make the same print again, I could maybe do it after in the same run, but on the next day even it would look completely different. And by allowing these errors to happen, it feels that the technology becomes juicy again. It's like you allow the technology to develop its own deviational pattern and its own habits. So, but at the same time, it is very important for me. Yeah, I talked about that before. Like that, you decide which is the good piece, which is the bad piece. You bless it with your lifetime, and ultimately you're responsible. Like you can't step back and say, I commit to the process, and the process does what it do. And I think that there is a responsibility in knowing that when you work with these tools, you somehow help technology to come into a productive place. Like when I think about us and many more outside, there are kind of millions of brains thinking of new possibilities, of new applications. Like you see a new tool and you suddenly you start tinkering in your brain and you think, oh, how could I use this? And it's kind of you help technology to get into, to fall into place and do what it is doing best. So I think we are very, very adaptable in putting technology into place. But we're not engineers. So this brings me to the next piece, which is like a little bit situated at the core of life. So I had the opportunity to produce a piece at the Max Planck Institute for Plant Breeding Research, and I invented or I chose a set of algorithms of four-dimensional cellular automata to grow on genetic code. So I used the genetic code from a plant that they use for most of their experiments, and used that as a starting condition for this set of algorithms to then grow on the genetic code some sort of mathematical generations or mathematically generated patterns. And at the same time, what I tried here was to reflect that or to make use of the fact that it is actually an industrial process that I'm doing there. So I wanted to show the overabundance of the material that I have in the studio. So I expose easily like 50 meters of photo paper, and I didn't want to narrow it down to just one single piece, but wanted to reflect or match the fact that also the genetic code is so long and so detailed that you can't see everything of it at a time, and just put out 50 meters of photo paper there in as one piece. So into this situation of working in the studio and making these drawings comes the choreographer David Dawson into my studio, and he offered me he saw these pieces and he said, okay, that's great, let's do something together. And he offered me a collaboration and to do a stage design for a new production in Amsterdam. And for me, that was, of course, great, because suddenly, before only me or the spectator was somehow the point of reference of this thinking of man and machine and creativity, and but these were very abstract images, and suddenly I had the possibility to have a body and humans inside of my picture, and to work out how this juxtaposition could be fruitful, and create an image that stands for itself. So this first piece was about memory and about self, and took a lot of ideas from Greek mythology. So this scene is from the scene The Threads of Ariadne, and it is obvious that there are these millions of red threads. And when you see this, you think, why is this not interactive? Why is this not like directly reacting to the dancers? And I mean, we talked about this earlier this morning in the choreographic coding panel. This is a company of very highly trained dancers with a very classical idiom, and I was coming into this situation somehow as an alien or as a guest, and I couldn't approach them and overwhelm them with something that I thought was like the latest clue of media art. And so I had quite a traditional approach on how this collaboration of a choreographer and a digital artist could work in a setting like this. And I tried to avoid the question of how is this done? How is this, is the tracking accurate? Is it, could it be rendered with more particles, or is it like, so it's a concurrence, it's a going along of these two levels. That is the dancers with them and the choreography or the setting that I create around. So in this piece, there were three elements. One were the drawings that you just saw before, and one was the reoccurrence of live video. So I'm showing a couple of images here because I have a video of this later as well, because the image quality of the videos, of the stills, is just so much better. I used the video kind of as a narrative device, where this scene is about memory, and it's a duet which is being recorded and then being played back at a 45-second delay, and the delay is catching up with real time, and you suddenly have a duet with becoming a quartet, becoming a sextet, and so forth. And then this process is being mirrored back onto the stage. So you have another duo coming in, and another duo coming in, and another duo coming in, just kind of mirroring what is happening in the video back onto the stage, until it becomes like a totally timeless thing where you don't know what was present and what was past. And yeah, of course, using projection in an architectural way. So everything that you see here is being generated and rendered in real time, even though it was a time code show, so it was the same every time the show happened. But the thing why I chose to do it real time is because when you create it with a real time system, you can change it in real time. If this was video, and I had to re-render it, and I had to re-render it, then it would have been totally incompatible with the rehearsal process. So you only get 5 stage calls in a situation like this, where you can test your setup, and then you can do some changes, and then it has to premiere. So you somehow have to adapt to the same time and space of the dancers and be able to react and change your work as quickly as they do. The sequence is now being recorded. And then being played back here. coming back to real time. So the watch that is there on the screen is kind of then back into reality. So there's a small detour to get the context right for what was going on here. What David didn't know at that time was that I was professional in designing large-scale media environments for brands and trade fair stands like Mercedes here. And in this collaboration and doing this stage work, somehow the professional background of productions like these, for me, they merge with the artistic, free artistic development that I've done before. So from projects like these, I get a lot of technological and production professional experience. And maybe among many, just one project which also shows how I try to bring generative approaches to stage also in these fields is here for the Mercedes booth in Frankfurt in 2011. I created kind of the production look that would structure the whole show. So we had like 2-3 minute show blocks and in between a particle system that was also reoccurring in the stand architecture that had force fields applied to the cars that traveled on stage. So we involved tracking there and connected the movement of this the movement of the particle system and the look of the production to you get the point. So the second production collaboration with David was again for the Dutch National Ballet in Amsterdam. And it has as point of departure the poems The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot, which are very much of a post-war, disillusioned view on the world, that we live in a world that is over-rationalized and determined by machines and processes, and it's very fast, and we were looking how we could create an image for this search for intimacy in a world that is too fast and too quick and too synthetic for all of us. So I came up with the proposal to put one light element as a juxtaposition to each dancer up into the space above the dancers. And to create a synthetic space, so the stage is basically a plastic box, and we have 16 dancers and 16 light elements, and the costumes are very neon color, so you have kind of very synthetic elements that get close to the skin and to the dancers, and the dancer and the music, which was from classical orchestra, was kind of setting off against this synthetic background. So the idea that technology is ultimately very alien to us, and we inhabit with technology the same space. So whereas the first production was kind of virtual and creating only a backdrop, I wanted to share the same space with the dancers and get they produced the film. artificial. So when you produce something that is kinetic and not digital, I bet many people have found out or work in the same field here, but it is so much more complicated and difficult than doing something on the screen or just in digital space, because these objects, they can crash, they can touch each other, so they were so close that the second row could collide with the first one, which also happened when you lose the DMX connection to these devices. And a big part of a project like this is, of course, to convince the theater that you can actually do something like this. So you come up with the idea and they say, no, it's not possible and not in the budget, and ultimately I get to the point where I work with a mechatronic designer in Berlin to plan the whole thing and actually build a one-to-one prototype and show them, hey, it's possible, and one of these elements is 2,000 euros and you can buy it. Yeah, like sometimes it's a very far way from a simple idea with 16 light sticks to get it actually into reality. And this is the last scene where every dancer becomes replaced by its light soul, so to say. And this rehearsal, the curtain came in very late, so skip here. Yeah, this is because I couldn't control the objects myself in the end with VVVV, because the theater wouldn't let me. I delivered a score out of VVVV. And they had to reprogram it in Pandora and do their flybar system. This is basically the full show with the motion score. Yeah, sorry, I'm over time already, so I'm skipping a couple of things. Yeah, so in this collaboration with David, there is this is the very last project that I'm showing here, which is trying to do even less in the regard of overwhelming the dancers in a certain way, because in the other piece before, I really created a choreography for the light bars that was very much in concurrence, and this last project here is just using geometric projections, light boxes, and a very slow, ever-changing speed of composition, of changing the composition. So this was for the Royal Opera House in London. So this idea of employing the computer for the production of art and to develop a corporeal and bodily understanding of it is, as I tried to get across, it's always been very important for me to accompany this on a critical level. So I should point out that a few others of my fellows who are here and myself, we do the Note Festival, which is circling around BBBB, and we teach a lot there, and we tinker and we perform and we try to use real materials and real bodies, real beings and real instruments. and accompany this with a critical subtext that allows us to develop a language to speak about these things and to navigate the developments properly and to employ them to our joy and but with the necessary critical distance. So I hope to see you at Note 15 and thank you. I'm already over time, so I'm around if somebody has